ones that have joined us. I do want to thank those of you who have made, had the opportunity to join us. And so part of it, recognizing that our lives have undergone, major disruptions, and we are reintegrating. And on the hopeful side, I was reading a New York Times today where we're in that next cycle of, it seems like we go in a 2-month surge period, but that, the number of cases are dropping, and the mortality is dropping. And so, what does it all mean, and how do we prepare? Because I think for those of you who have been, in the front lines of the pandemic, there's that post-traumatic stress that we have to go through. But one of the biggest things that it did call upon us, and so today, as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, it did call upon us in our careers in academic medicine to be change agents and change management. And so it really is wonderful to have now I can call them senior colleagues. There was a time when I could say differently, but having senior perspectives in academic medicine and the journey, and really why we do what we do and what keeps us going amidst this whirl of constancy of change that may seem taxing at times. So so we have Dr. Natalie Pereira and Dr. Herrera, and I know that I could do long introductions, but I thought that maybe it might just be nice that you both have, very impressive leadership roles, can kind of tell a little bit. And that's what this panel is. It's really on, what it means, as a Latinx or Latina, right, to really have embarked on this academic medicine career. And, and as we go forward, and hopefully those that have joined us, they ask their probing questions, is what did we think the future looks like? So I think on that, I will leave it up to either of you as to who wants to kick off and self-introduce, because it's always powerful in how we see ourselves and what image we want to communicate to others. We'll go first.
I can go first. So my name is Iris Herrera, and I'm an associate professor of medicine. I've been at New Jersey Medical School for 17 years. I started in July of 2004. I am originally from the Dominican Republic, although I grew up here in Newark. I came here when I was a child. And, but I did go back to the Dominican Republic for medical school. I did my college at St. Peter's College in Jersey City. And right now I am the Chief Medical Information Officer for University Hospital. And I've been doing this for about 6 years. I would say almost 7. I'm not quite sure. But so I did grammar school, high school, and college here, and then I went back to Dominican Republic to medical school because it was much cheaper. I am the daughter of a single mom, and who came here, and she was a factory worker, and she wanted to give me a good education, so I could afford to go to I did not know about the Hispanic Center of Excellence program or the pipeline. I had no one to guide me about those things. But when I went to medical school, I met my husband, who is also a physician. We got married. We came back to the States in 1990, and we have 3 children. The oldest of who just got married. She's also a physician. She's a pediatrician doing her GI fellowship now. I have one that just graduated recently got his bachelor in computer science. And then my youngest is 26. He's going to be 27 soon. And he has a degree in marketing. I did not start out thinking that I was going to be into academic medicine. I had 3 young children when my youngest was 18 months old when I started my residency at Bronx, Lebanon, which is a similar community to this one. So I was not thinking that I was going to have an academic career. I wanted to work. I mean, we had 3 small children to take care of, and my husband started his residency when I was a third year. So it was tough for us having 3 kids and raising a family. So I stayed at Bronx, Lebanon, where I trained, and I was the medical director from one of the clinics. And I was there a total of 9 years. A friend of mine came to work here at New Jersey Medical School, and she talked to a division chief at the time, Dr. Salas Lopez, who, when they brought me in for an interview, I wasn't looking for a job, but I was commuting from New Jersey every day into the Bronx. So I came, we talked, and then she brought me back for a second interview. And I always tell this story because then I had an interview with Maria. And when I heard what she was doing and all the stuff that was going on at the school, that's what made me decide to really change jobs. And I don't regret it. I've been here ever since, and I've learned a lot. We have amazing opportunities, and I like doing academic medicine. And although I'm not doing a lot of teaching most recently, but I am involved indirectly, with education as we develop the electronic medical record. I don't know what else I can say about myself, except that at this point in my career now, I have an almost empty nest. So I'm thinking about what next for me.
As long as the what next means that you're really just going to keep growing in our landscape, that would be absolutely wonderful. But we also know that, that's something, for all of us. So maybe we'll turn over to Dr. Natalie Pereira.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. This is, it's really nice to be able to do this. Once in a while, we get out of our sort of busy day and really try to find ways to connect. And, it'd be great to do this in person, but given the circumstances, we continue to do this virtually. So Mondays is sort of my virtual day. I've like been in back-to-back meetings all day on this conferencing approach that we're using now. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's exciting to be able to do this. I'm a little bit of a different journey than Iris, but I was thinking about, okay, where do we start? So I'll start with my current role. So I am right now in the Department of Medicine. I'm the division chief for general internal medicine, and I also hold the role as assistant dean for primary care and community initiatives at NJMS. And I've been doing that part of my job for the last 4 years, I believe it's already. God, it's hard to believe that's been that long. But the journey really started very early on. Much like Iris, I was not born here. I actually was born in Uruguay, South America, and I came here at the age of 13 to Orange, New Jersey. So I'm very Essex County inbred, never left Essex County for anything other than vacation and training, additional training, not necessarily my residency training, but I've been here my entire life, and went to Orange High. And if I could say that, sort of, looking back, that first experience of what disparities look like, it's reflecting on when I went to school and the process into getting into college, for example, and living with the fact that, even though we were, a group of us was honor society and we were, high scholars and, really good students, but, having people tell you that an A in Orange High School is worth a C at Columbia High down the street, which was really, South Orange, Maplewood territory. So it's really, you live with that challenge, but yet, you can also speak to the power of mentorship, because we had an amazing counselor in high school that really, really pushed for us to get better, improve, and take advantage of opportunities. So that was my first experience. And she was able to get us to Uppsala College at the time in East Orange to do a summer program on math and science. And that was, my first experience of like taking advantage of being able to enroll in a program with the intention of really giving you an opportunity, right, to improve, to progress, and then to apply for college. And then that process of applying for college was also very similar. I had no idea what I was doing. My parents had no idea what they were doing. The idea that you had to go visit colleges was unheard of. And their idea was, well, you want to go to school, go to school. Like, you don't have to go sleep anywhere. You just go to school. And so navigating that experience, not knowing what to do, again, is the importance of mentoring and where people can help you. And so that got me to Fairleigh Dickinson University completely by chance, because I was supposed to go to Montclair State on the premise that, in those days, they really mandated these things. I had to do a summer program with them in order to qualify to get into the school. And I was sick that summer. I was in the hospital, and so missed the summer program. And so they denied my entrance to Montclair State, and Rutgers turned me down. And so a friend of mine was going to FDU, and she goes, "Why don't you just come with me?" And that was my experience of applying to college. I said, "Okay, I'll go with you." And I was lucky enough to get a full ride to Fairleigh Dickinson University. And that was the end of it. But, again, my desire to be a doctor came from very early on. I knew since the age of 8 that this is the only thing I ever wanted to do. And so how did I get there in a place that I had no idea? I had no idea, when I tell you no idea, what it was like or what it was needed. How do I get there, right? So FDU was good for me. It was local. I was a commuter. I worked all 4 years of college, and I graduated with a degree in biology. And at that time, it was molecular technologies, which now, of course, is a standard of care, but this is when they first started. So I graduated in '88, and then I had to look for a job. And so I have been on campus officially for 33 years, since 1988. I came to work at what it was called CMMI at the time, the Center for Molecular Medicine and Immunology at NJMS. And I was there for 4 years, and I worked as a scientist, but I never lost that desire to really go into medical school. And so I got accepted to do a PhD at Rutgers. I started that process, but never lost sight of medical school. And so after a couple of trials, again, my first trial, I had no idea what I was doing, but took a lot of advice from the people that were at the time at the school. And I gave it a last try in 1992, and that's when I got accepted into our medical school. So I'm a product of NJMS, graduate class of '96, and I believe the first cohort of the HCOE. So Dr. Green had taken leadership of the HCOE at the time. And so, as I always say, God has your path sort of worked out for you, and things happen when they need to happen at the right time. And so that was for me, my opportunity. And I never looked back. I stayed. I then completed medical school, did well, was able to get into our residency program. And again, I didn't stay and did residency at our school because I had no other place to go. I stayed because I looked pretty much, I was already married. I got married very young. We looked from New Jersey south everywhere, and I interviewed in a lot of places, including Hopkins and Miami and Georgia, Emory. And I realized that what I was looking for was a 3-hospital system, which is what we had in our residency program, in a community that I wanted to take care of. And so for me, I just kept looking, and it got to a point where I said, what am I looking for? I have what I want and the community that I want where I am. And so that was my decision into staying in our residency program. And then So, residency program then turned into a chief year in 2000. And again, the impact of mentoring. Dr. Johansson, the chair of medicine at the time, was an incredible mentor as well for me and career-wise, and really wanted me to take opportunity to and consider staying and as a faculty member. I knew I didn't want to go into private practice. That was not what I wanted. And so this, to me, academic medicine was the only way to do it. And, I stayed as a faculty member since then. And, and then you think about, what do you do at that point, right? So I was very fortunate, supported through the HCOE. I was very interested in cancer research, and I was able to get, support to protect my time to really focus on it. And I would just say that it's really is a two-way street. When someone gives you an opportunity to do something and to take advantage of building your career or your knowledge, or your leadership, you also have to give back at the same time. So you take those opportunities and then you learn from them, but then you find ways to, okay, now what can I do with them that contributes back into the system that you're in? So it's been a real journey for me. I've been able to do a couple of other opportunities, leadership development through the National Hispanic Medical Association. That was a great opportunity to do that, a fellowship through the Moffitt Cancer Center. And my interest in cancer research then led to health services research related to cancer prevention. So that is, is how I would stay connected. The one thing I would say is that I never thought that I will go into administration to the level that I am in now. I never saw myself that way. And again, then somebody then says, you should think about it, consider it, and here's why, right? And giving you the reasons why you can be on a leadership role and really make a difference. And that's when you realize that it's not so much about just what you want to do, but how you find ways to be able to give back, both to the community that you work with, the people that you work with, your patients, and then give back to the system that you're in. So I took that leap of faith. I said, I will only do it for 5 years. And I've been a division director now for 9 years and counting. But it's really been an incredible experience. And I could not have done any of it if it wasn't for the support and the mentoring that we get in our institution. And definitely, through Dr. Soto Green as being, a major contributor to that.
Can you both comment, because, as we've going through, as we say, the twin pandemics, and obviously the race pandemic is, very much, at the forefront in terms of, where others have, called the minority tax, and how have you learned to navigate it? And maybe for the group that's here, while some may know what it is, maybe define it in your own terms, and how do you navigate and manage it to move you in a direction of success?
For me, I can say that, you kind of always know in the background that you kind of have to do better than others to prove yourself. But I've never been so aware of that as I got older, because when I was in high school, I don't remember that I noticed these things. I just always never thought that I couldn't achieve something. My mom was, even though she only had a third grade education, she always was big on education. And I never thought that there was nothing that I could achieve. However, as I got on into my career, I understood that there was something that maybe I had taken for granted and not realized all this, giving myself credit for all the things that I had achieved. And during this pandemic, what I can tell you that I have learned is that everything actually just confirms that life is short, that we nothing is guaranteed, that there's a lot of loss and a lot of pain, and that our community actually has been greatly impacted. And I think that our physicians have been greatly impacted. The people that are providing the care, nurses, everybody that has worked in this hospital and at the medical school has been greatly impacted, and that we have a lot of resilience in dealing with those things that I think comes from being immigrants, from being children of immigrants, people that came here without, at least for my mom, she didn't speak the language. Like I said, she didn't have a lot of education, but she made it work. She took that chance. I mean, think about it: a young person with a young child coming to the U.S. without knowing the language and making it and being able to provide for me the opportunity to pursue my education the way that I have, I think says a lot about our community and what immigrants bring to this country. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Maria. Is that what you were looking?
No. I think it's really powerful, because you could argue the other two is what happens to individuals, right? And that's what we've seen generationally, right? So that have been here, whether, brought, with their own free will, and what America has had, done to all, right? Done to the groups, and then those that have been historically here for a very long time, what has happened. And so that's the challenge sometimes, is that we lose, right? Our families lose that hope that they need, and that they have the resilience to survive day to day, but do they have, the wherewithal? And here we are, we're blaming people, right, for what they cannot do. And I remember that, myself, it's like, well, if you were given a privilege, right, and you're not viewed as an immigrant, then it's your fault if you have not taken advantage of it. And so that's something that is very, very important, that we all need to be very cognizant of, that we don't go into judging one another, as has happened across, our groups. Maybe Anna.
Oh yeah, totally agreed. I mean, I sort of making myself little notes of, really the question that you're asking. And I have to say, as an immigrant child, to a certain extent, that immigrant status is a protective status, right? So you come into a new country, the mentality, the approach on your family, and the immediate model is you work, and you're in a country that gives you all the opportunities that you couldn't have where you came from. And so that is the immigrant mentality. You do not see racism. You do not see lack of anything. You do not use the system. You do not participate in welfare. You do not take advantage of assistance programs, because that is not meant to be for you, right? That is the immigrant mentality, whether you come from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, wherever it is that you come from, that is the model. Africa, this, Central Caribbean areas. You come and you work. And so as a first generation, child, when you go to high school, so for us, Orange, it's incredible. I mean, I think about this many times over. We did not know. I came here in 1979. That was a short 10 years after the Newark, uprising. And so if you think about it, where Orange, so East Orange, and the Newark greater area where they lay at that moment in time, 280 was just built, right? Not even 10 years before. And how people began to move out of Newark and into the cities. And I came into a school that was at that moment in time, probably about, 70% African American, right? And you come in as an immigrant child. So without knowing, right, you're coming into, a relationship with people that have suffered enormous pain for the last, many, many years, and certainly the last 10 years at that moment in time, families, and it was so raw and so alive. But you're 13 years old. What do you know about any of that stuff, right? What does anybody know at that age that are all immigrants? So it was the school dynamics was, the Hispanic kids or the immigrant kids and the people that were here, right? And so that feeling, that antagonism that society created themselves. I mean, we went through a period, I remember all through the 80s and the 90s, to finally understand that minority communities need to stand together and not fight with each other, because that was meant to be the model, right? You fight with each other, you create these antagonistic relationships with each other. And that was a real challenge. For me, I never really learned that until way after, high school and college, and like really getting to understand. College was the first time where you begin to see those differences, that people do make a difference. But it was very, very interesting. So, coming in with that mentality kind of protects you a little bit, but it also, to what you're said, to your point, Maria, of being cognizant that your experience doesn't cancel out the experience of people that were here and that have suffered through that institutionalized or structural racism that exists. And so being cognizant of that, it's very important. And that's something that I think in the Latino community continues to be a challenge, because many of the communities are in areas of poverty as well. And so rather than supporting each other to get out of poverty, becomes this, antagonistic fight among minorities, which needs to stop, right? So how do we do and take care of that? I can't say that I've felt ever sort of discriminated in that sense, but I would tell you that, the next experience really was to be a woman in medicine, and to go through that as a student and then as a resident, and not being able to give in the same kind of level of respect to a certain extent as a male resident or as a male doctor. And even among our own people, right? Even among Latinos who would say, oh, you're a doctor, right? Like you're not supposed to, right? Because you're a woman or because of whatever. But that's sort of that shock when they talk to you and you're like, oh, you're the doctor, And so what does that mean in that unconscious level for someone? And of course, the other one is, is within our own Latino culture, the classism and racism that exist within our own culture, right? For me, coming from Uruguay, it's a country where the, Black community is 4%. I come from a very mixed family. It's a majority, white European population. And I have people from my own country who I take care of in the hospital who says to me, oh, I didn't know you were the doctor. I didn't know you were from, it's as if there's a disconnect, right? So living through those experiences does change the way you think about this in many ways.
And Anna, you mentioned something that I came to realize later. So I got here in 1967, August 1967, 1 month after the Newark riots. So thinking back, I mean, we came here, my mom, I don't even think she was aware of what had happened and what that meant and what we found. She just started to work, and we had such a close community of, Hispanics, that it wasn't until I started doing my final report for my master's in public health that I did it on, urban communities, and I read about redlining. That was us. We were part of the redlining process. Did we think about that? We didn't know. People just
Right.
and went along, and they just did what they needed to do to take care of their families and to bring them forward. But this was our community. There was white flight here in Newark. You could see that where we were living, when you read about it, that's exactly where we were, in a district where Black people and Latinos were not going to be given, a loan to buy a house at a decent rate. And because they were considered, that they were not, they possibly could not do it. So that's why I meant before about learning as you go along, because you're so protected. I can say that I was very protected living in the community that looked like me, right? And then my mom protecting me, that I think we really took a lot of things for granted at that time.
I think with that, one of the things, we just met across all the health profession schools that make up our BHS is to really construct an overall learning goals around racism. As you know, this institution, last May, we approved the structural racism competency, and it hits to what you're both highlighting. And one of the main things, if we look at it, I just have it in front of me, the first learning goal is to make sure that we inform everyone that race is a social construct, right? Right, and that it isn't, right? And we all, growing up in the career in medicine, right? Somehow we were scribed, and I think my first lesson was when I had a Puerto Rican that was in sickle cell crisis that was in the intensive care unit, and a resident arguing that they could possibly not be a sickler, right? Even though the evidence showed, but because she belonged to being Puerto Rican and she wasn't African American. So that really stands out as, or having, cystic fibrosis missed until adulthood, and the lack of treatment because if you were Hispanic, that wasn't a disease, right? That really affected, and having the pediatric pulmonologist, because he was passionate and belonged to, right, a Latino group, therefore was really curious and really delve more deeply. The other is that we have to know historical examples. And so that's really the tough part. We have to be able to present it and discuss it and really learn from it, and yes, it was our predecessors, and we have lived through those experiences, but history and its impact, right? And the structural racism, and then it will help us to look at it. What is it at a systems level, right? That we need to do. What are those systemic barriers, which we still see cases that our students will bring through the learning environment, and then finally is what are the skill sets that we all need to develop, right? To be able to identify and address, right? And overcome, right? These biases and the racism that has impacted not only us in our careers, because we should call it out, it's there. It's just that we have learned how to manage it and navigate it, but it doesn't mean that we should be accepting, because we want a change. And how do we do it for colleagues, for the junior students who are here, for our junior faculty, and how do we do it for our community? So I think that you're really, it's no longer acceptable to just say we come and we live in our cocoons, right? We have to be able to have these conversations with each other and really see the world around us. So I guess with that, what would you paint as the future? And then we could just open it up, because I see, what do you think? If you were going to drive a change, what would you want?
Well, I certainly think that sharing our stories really helps in our experiences, and letting people know that it can be done. Because we all go through our doubts. Medical school is extremely hard. Having a family and going to medical school or doing a residency is extremely hard. We give up a lot, time with our family, time for leisure. Well, everybody it seems to be living a good life, and we are still sacrificing a lot. But like Anna said, I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor too. I mean, first I wanted to be a teacher, and then that lasted for like a year, and then it was always medical school till the end. And I'm glad that I did it. I've had a family. Anna certainly is an example of having a family. She has triplets, so in addition to another son. So it can be done. And I think that sharing our stories is good, especially for Latina women, to know that this can be done, that you can have a career that you enjoy and you can also have your family. Um, and know that, you know, it'll come with sacrifices, but at the end, you're just gonna kind of prioritize what is important to you, and you can make it work.
Anna. Your
Yeah,
thought.
so I think a lot about this, because as Iris says, I have 4 kids, 3 dogs, a house, and a job. But I have these conversations with my girls. You know, we live in West Orange. West Orange is a very integrated community. I mean, it's really fascinating to see, and how the kids are coming together at the level of the school at all levels. And they you know, there's never a conversation about, at least not in my house, but this idea that they don't talk about themselves in terms of race or origin or ethnicity. It comes out at times, but you know, you're talking about friends in my household is you know, Ryan, and it's Jada, and it's, you know, it's never about, you know, where they're from or what they look like, or right. And so if you take that away from the conversation for the kids, you know, for them, they embrace everyone really as a human, right? There are good friends and bad friends. There are nice people and not good people. But that's true for everyone. It's not, it should never be framed around a color or an ethnicity. And I think that is the biggest thing for us, to overcome our own biases. I think our own internal biases and our own upbringing biases, and being able to stand up for yourself and stop it when it happens, right? You know, I think among Latinos, the biggest challenge is, you know, we see people in that landscape of color, but also class. And this is a conversation that happened this weekend, actually. We went to a friend's house, and they have an invited person, and it's a family of them. And for some reason, the conversation that was happening is about, oh, but he is also, you know, he's an engineer, like as if it was a surprise. You know, this person of Ecuadorian background who's very Indian looking is a phenomenal, you know, tech engineer that's developing apps that are very powerful right now. And it was almost that disconnect in the conversation, because it's not done intentionally, which is the serious part of it, right? That it is not intentional, it's completely unconscious, is to kind of like pair those two together, that if because you're Indian or Indian looking or Indian background, that's your phenotype, that you cannot be this super high tech engineer that's developing apps, right? So, and I think it's happened so commonly and so unconsciously that we have to bring it to that forefront and not let that happen, and not fall for that trap, right? That, you know, because you look a certain way, you cannot be this person or that person or have that career. I think that's on us. And I think for those of us that are immigrant kids that come here and our parents suffer the influence of, you know, race and ethnicity in America, that we don't let that follow through with us, that we don't let that happen to us, that we change that framework, because until you change that framework, nothing is going to change, right? So being able to just be open about it, and call it out for what it is, which is, I think, the biggest challenge in that landscape.
I have to add something though, Anna, because I'm also would consider myself a mixed family, because my husband is a white Dominican. So until he speaks, you won't know that he is, you know, his Dominican. I can tell you that he looks like an American, you know, everywhere he goes, you know, he looks like an American. But our youngest son, Daniel, he is mixed. He is a Black child. And for him, I must say that his experience has not been that way. And I think with young Black men, we need to be a little bit more careful, because they really are judged and they really are treated much, much differently. And it's unfortunate that I have to say that I had to have the talk. My husband and I have had to have the talk with our son about if the policeman stops you. And my son has been stopped. He was victim of stop and frisk in New York multiple times because he went to St. John's University. And and the police, he would tell us, they would throw him against the wall and they would search his pockets for no reason whatsoever, with a white friend watching that all this was going on. And then when he would show ID, oh, but why didn't you tell us that you were from St. John's? Well, did you ask? And was there any reason to stop? He's been stopped in my car because he's not supposed to be driving my car, right? Because a kid that looks like him should be driving that type of car.
Right.
So I think that, yes, I can say that I honestly don't remember people. If they were being prejudiced against me, I did not notice because nobody was going to stop me from getting what I wanted. But for him, I think it's a little bit more difficult to shake that, because no matter what he does and how intelligent or educated or kind he is judged by the color of his skin, unfortunately.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important for us to be able to have that conversation with them. And, but to Maria's point as to how do we change, how do we educate, how do we do this at our level and really teach? I think we, as a whole, as a society, we have to leave our biases at the door, but we cannot be blind to the fact that these things happen, right? For our students, our male students, you're a medical student, right? For our female students, right? Whether they're ever going to be, there will always be somebody that's not going to see them as a doctor or think less of them because, right, of their race or how they look, their ethnicity. So how do we overcome that? I mean, I'm a firm believer that we have to speak it out and call it out when it's there, and call it out to people that may not want to hear it when we call it out. That is wrong, right? And and teach our kids that it's that we have to stop it. I mean, for me, I have to teach my kids that actually they're all very sort of like lighter skin, blue eyes with my hair, but my daughters have been said, "Oh, you don't look Hispanic." To which I had to say to them and give them a long lesson in education, what does that mean, right? Because as Iris said, her husband is very white from the Dominican Republic. We know people from everywhere that can be, blonde and blue eyes, and they can be as dark as someone from Africa. My grandmother is very Black. Right? So what does it mean to be Hispanic, right? And so being able to call that out and teach our kids how to address that when they're being asked that, it's very important.
And I think that's what's going to necessitate for all of us and in our positions is to really foster this type of conversation, right? And really helping each other listen and then come up and actually put forth the strategies, right? So we're going to go on this big campaign, obviously, to what we call out upstandard training. It's really commensurate when you think about it with our voices and our education. We should be able to exercise it, right, in a respectful manner that allows individuals to assess their ouch moments, right, that they have induced and really reflect so that way there will be meaningful change. Because I definitely identify with Iris. I have 2 sons and a daughter, and 2 of them are darker, and 1 is light. And it's amazing having 2 sons, 1 lighter and 1 darker, on the differential treatment of society with both of them. And right from the time that they were little kids, of what they could potentially do and not do, and how much they needed their parents to exercise their voice and be demanding of basic tenets of what they were capable of. And all that would define them was the difference in the color of their skin, right? And then certainly, obviously, 37-year marriage to, an African-American, right? Also teaches you a lot, and we've always had this conversation as you do, but this is what we have to live through. So maybe we only have a few minutes. Let's open it up if anyone would like to know for their career and their aspirations, any pearls that you're seeking from these two great individuals.
I just reflecting on what Dr. Natalia was saying about when you see something, say something in real time so that you can use that opportunity in real time, in real life to educate the person and try to change culture. That can also, given our culture in particular, that can sometimes even be an obstacle because a lot of us growing up are taught the opposite of that. You know, don't complain, don't explain. It's like we're the British royal family, but just overcoming that not perception, but that aspect of our culture, it's something that I personally find myself actively working on and putting an effort towards so that I feel more comfortable with each experience, becoming more vocal about what I perceive as not okay. So that I find a challenge. So if anyone has any advice on how to work on that, I think that would be great.
You have to
No,
practice.
it's great that you bring that up because it is true. I mean, you can be upstanding and call it out. And you have to be, I think that for me, it's always separating things that are true and unrelated, because people tend to associate, right? If somebody does something, immediately is sort of associated with the person, the background, their color, and everything else that came with it. And the reality is there is good and bad in every space, right? So to separate things, to say, okay, did somebody do something because they just did something and because they're not a good citizen? Or did they do something because of who they are, right? And I think being able to separate those two, for me, it always keeps it sort of clean in my head, right? I think the biggest challenge for us, for example, with our patients, I had a patient of mine who had just had surgery and he has to take the bus and walk to University Hospital, his post-op appointment, and he literally got robbed and beat up in front of University Hospital in daylight, right? By two African-American young men. So to this man, this, almost 80-year-old Hispanic guy, right? What was the first thing that comes to him? Oh, these two, African-American, these two Black kids beat me up. And the reality is they didn't beat you up because they're Black. They beat you up because they were doing something terribly bad and they're just bad people. It's not because they're Black, right? And so again, how do you dissociate it? Because that's at the core of racism in this country is that dissociating piece, right? And for Latinos, I think the one thing that I have to call it out, because to me, that's exactly what the issue is. This is not a linear problem of the United States. Okay, our Latin American countries are full of racism and classism, and people don't want to talk about it. They come to America, and the first thing is, oh, that does not happen where I come from. And that's the biggest nonsense because it does happen, but it is so hidden, it's so culturally hidden that they just don't see it, right? And I think that's important to recognize.
So I think that one of the things is to think about dissociating the behavior from the individual and not saying that they're bad people, right? We give people a benefit of the doubt, not in this case, obviously, right? These were bad people, but it didn't mean because they belong to a particular racial or ethnic group that's why, right? And you're right.
Exactly.
But when you're doing these conversations is to focus on the behavior. And there isn't a one stop fits all because you decide the timing and the space of when you would do that, right? Whether it's in a group, whether it's individual, and who are the individuals being impacted. So we're going to be launching cases, right? And really training to just keep moving us in a comfort. If I can tell you in my position, do I have all the answers? No. But clearly through a lot of different experiences, we can sit and really say, okay, how do I help you find your voice that you carried out? Or sometimes it just needs to be picked up a notch, right? But what we cannot do anymore is just kind of what people say, is just kind of just suck it up and deal with it, because we cannot change the environment. What I do find, people who continuously have had these instances where they have made environments uncomfortable for others, they were never told. No one ever came up. We find it much easier, right, to tell our patients, right, to tell their families of when they're not doing something right, but we find it very, very difficult when it's a same level colleague or a perceived more senior colleague, and we don't find our voice equivalently or comparably, nor do we feel that we could ever change the status quo. And I think that that's what we're saying. We have to do this now, particularly, right? We have two major movements, right? You had the Me Too movement, and it's not to say, right, all men are created equal and they're all bad, right? And that's what we should not be. And similarly, we cannot continue to say, well, you know, the whole racism issue, it really doesn't affect me. It really affects all of us, right? And so those are the reasons why, you know, to try to find our voices, and to really, and through our voices and through the positions that both Dr. Natali Bereda and Dr. Herrera hold, there are ambassadors, and their life's experiences really lead them to really be champions, to really making sure that we achieve, right, equity and justice. And that is something that we all carry, and that we want to do, you know, to have the environment so that you can be successful, and that someone doesn't open the door in one direction, say, oh, only this group can handle these issues and the other group can only handle those issues. And yet we're not at the pinnacle of what we could be, right? Which may be certain leadership roles, right? We are excluded because of these prior beliefs of what a group can and cannot do, including across, you know, the multiple identities that we each have. Are there any comments? I did see that Ala, I know she's been off screen, but she put some in the comment box. But I didn't know if she wanted to share anything. And I know we're just abutting. We only have a few minutes. We may have lost her, but you know, she really shared some comments in response to the gentleman who had the trauma, you know, and what she felt. So maybe Anna, Iris, closing for the future hopes.
I think that at least I always remain optimistic, because there has been growth. But I agree very much with Anna that, and I don't know what you think about this, but I think that we also have internalized that we are not as good. We have let others dictate that we are not as good, you know, because these people came and discovered us when, you know, we were already there. We weren't lost. We were there, and internalized that they were our saviors, and that, you know, they really did us a favor. And so I think that really, we need to work on that. But certainly we've come a long way, and we just can't give up.
600 years of history.
Anna, last parting word.
600 years of history, right? I'm still very hopeful that we can, you know, live in a world that's much more just and accepting of people for who they are, and not for what they look like or what they can do or how famous they can get or how educated they are. At the same time, I think all of us on this call, you know, based on our roles, our positions, our education, do have a responsibility to call it out and to, you know, educate others and to mentor our students to feel comfortable in that space, to be able to speak to what they see and how they see it. I think the next big challenge for us is going to really be finding the connection again, because there's started to be a disconnect between what we're teaching at one level about being upstander and about, you know, really calling it when you see it, and versus what's being practiced at the level of, you know, the generational, you know, sort of medicine space, you know, the generational groups. And I think we have to find that connection again. So that's going to be the next phase, I think, for us, is to how do you find that connection to make sure that our students and everyone, our workers, feel comfortable in that space. I think that's going to be critically important.
Thank you on that. So we will be ending right on time. And as always, I want to thank Mercedes Padilla for, making this all happen. And thanks to our students who have joined us today. Take care.